What's up, you sick mother bluffers? Welcome back to the channel. In this one, I'm playing a 10k guaranteed tournament at Final Table. This time, I'm going to show you every hand I played, just so you can get a better picture of my overall tournament experience, as opposed to isolated hands. Let's go. About half an hour goes by before I get involved in a hand, while I've been watching chips flying with very marginal hands, so I'm anxious to get in the mix. There's a couple of limps before I look down at pocket sevens in the cutoff. I overlimp, small blind completes, and the big blind checks. We go 5 ways to a flop of 398 all diamonds. No set for me, small blind leads for 600, middle position calls, and I fold. 10 minutes later, there's a couple of limps before I look down at pocket aces in the cutoff. Let's go. Raise it up to 1000, and the 2 limpers make the call. We go 3 ways to a flop of 7, 5, 6, 2 diamonds. I don't love this flop, especially with 2 early limp calls. My opponents could easily have flopped a set, but when they both check to me, I'm going to c-bet, try to get some value from flush draws, straight draws, maybe pocket 8s, pocket 9s. Anyway, I continue for 1600, and only the middle position player makes the call. Heads up to the turn, which comes the 10 of spades. They check to me for a second time. I fire a bet of 3500, and then
here come the pain!
All in.
Flop the set. Why does it always have to be difficult? Why is it always hard?
That's what she said.
Why is poker hard? I end up making a very reluctant fold. I don't think I'm ever winning a 120 big blind pot with just a pair. When I asked my opponent later, they said they flopped a set. Not sure I 100% believe them. In any case, it's always frustrating to lose a pot with aces. 1 hour later. This table has been pretty splashy. I've been completely card dead. In this hand, there's a couple of limps for middle position on the small blind. When I look down at king queen offsuit in the big blind, I think the standard play would be to raise here, but for some reason, I decided to play a little tricky and just check my option. We go 3 ways to a flop of king 7-10, a flop top pair. Small blind checks to me. I decide to continue with a deceptive line and check to middle position, who leads out for 1000. Small blind folds, and this is where I think I make a mistake by just calling. I think on this board this is a mandatory check raise. Anyway, we go to the turn, which comes a queen, improving me to top 2. And the way this tournament has been going so far, you can bet your ass I'm thinking I've got the nuts. I once again decide to check, with the intention of check raising all in, but my opponent snap checks back. Nothing is going as planned so far as we go to the river, which comes a 9. This card is a little bit annoying, as it does give any jack a straight, but sitting with top 2 in game, I don't really want this to go check check and miss out on some value. I don't think my opponent would ever check a jack on the turn, having picked up an open ender, and I think I can get value from worse 2 pairs like king 10, queen 10, 10-9 suited. Maybe as played, my opponent will look me up with just a 10. So, with all that in mind, I decide to bet 2000. My opponent thinks for about 15 seconds before
Here come the pain!
6,000.
trying to tell me you have a jack, and then what jack do you have that limps, bets the flop, checks the turn. It's so annoying. It's the only thing you're raising. You only raise a jack, at least for value, so it could be a bluff. If you bet the flop with the jack, you don't check the turn when you got an open ender. It didn't seem that long at the time, but I tanked for about 3 whole minutes. Shout out to my table mates for their patience before finally You have a jack? Jack 10. Shout out to Dan. We briefly talked during the tournament. He said he watched a couple of vlogs, so nice hand, Dan. You put me in a tough spot and got max tilt value. I'm left with a couple of big blinds. Hopefully I can find a spot to double or triple up soon. The spot comes about 15 minutes later when there's a limp from under the gun 1 and I go down at ace queen suited in the low jack. I go all in for 1400. Unsurprisingly, I get a bunch of calls from the cutoff button and under the gun limper. I am all in and at risk as we go 4 ways to a flop of jack 7-6. Not much for me on this board, but action checks around. The turn is pretty interesting. It's the king of clubs giving me a royal flush draw. On this card, action checks to the cutoff, goes all in for 3800. The button thinks for about 40 seconds before making the call, and under the gun 1 folds. Going to showdown, the cutoff shows king queen suited for top pair. Button shows king 10 for a worse top pair. I'm actually not looking too bad here. I can win the main pot and almost quadruple up my stack with any club or 10, and of course, 10 of clubs would give me the royal.
Alright, I can get my first royal flush on the block. I need the 10 of clubs. Do it.
Oh, man.
Alright.
And with that, my first bullet is gone. I do have a second chance as there is one rebuy available, which of course, like a good degen, I'm going to get. Hopefully, bullet number 2 turns out better. About 5 minutes later, I look down at King Jack offsuit from under the gun 1. I wouldn't be surprised if GTO said this is just straight up an open fold, but I'm more in a GTFO kind of mood, so I open to 1500 and only the big blind makes the call. Quick note on the big blind, they've been playing about every hand so far and I'm just patiently waiting for a spot to stack them. We go heads up to a flop which comes 6, deuce, 9, 2 hearts, giving me some backdoor straight and flush draws and 2 overs. One other thing I've noticed about the big blind, they like to lead and c-bet at a frequency of just about 100% and for pretty large sizings too. In this case, they lead out for 2500 and considering my stack size, the fact this is a much better board for them than me, and that I most likely won't see a river for free, I decide to fold and wait for a better spot to get them. Literally, the next shuffle, I look down at King Jack suited from under the gun.
I'll try again.
15.
I open to 1500, action folds to my opponent from the previous hand in the small blind who unsurprisingly calls, and the big blind comes along as well. We go 3 ways to a flop of ace, king, queen, not a club in sight. My friend in the small blind is gonna do what they do and lead for 3000. The big blind folds, and once again, it's another fun spot for me.
I know it's not ace king or ace queen, right? I don't think it's king queen. So like a spade draw or like a shitty ace. I don't beat the shitty ace.
What about a spade draw with a straight draw?
Nice hand to my opponent as they get me to fold the better hand. I was pretty sure I was folding the best hand, but given I would have a stack to pot ratio of less than 1 if I just made the call, and the fact that I had little to no fold equity versus this particular opponent, I think a fold was the better option here. Slowly, but surely, tilt is settling in. The very next hand, there's a limp from under the gun 1, a raise to 1600 from middle position, which the hijack, miss 100 VPIP from the button, and the small blind call.
It's be a really nice time for a squeeze, right?
Before I look down at Jack 9 suited in the big blind. Jesus, dealer, calm down with the premiums, will ya?
I'll still play it.
I make the call, and the under gun 1 limper calls as well. We go 6 ways to a flop of 7, 9, 6 rainbow, giving me top pair, making this one of the best flops I've hit all night. There's just over 10k in the middle. I'm sitting on just under 8k, so you know what's going through my mind right now, but no. The small blind shits all over my plan, and donk leads for 3500.
Jesus Christ.
Given that this player has been playing super tight post flop thus far, and they're leading into 5 other players, I have to give them credit for a hand, so I fold. But let's see how the rest of the hand develops, shall we? Just so you can get a taste of the action at this table. Action folds around to the hijack, and they're the only player to make the call. They go heads up to a turn, which comes to king of clubs. Small blind throws out another small bet of 5600, which the hijack once again calls. The river comes to 4 of diamonds. Small blind bets 7000, and the hijack snap calls. Small blind shows pocket 10s, and the hijack shows 5-3 of clubs for a turned straight and flush draw, and they drilled the straight on the river, much to the dismay of the small blind, which, pardon my French, but qu'est-ce qu'elle branle à limper une paire de 10 déjà? Le donk lead au flop, ok, on laisse passer, mais bon, le bet à la turn avec un roi sur le board, c'est quoi ce bordel? Bon, et puis l'autre qui paie une relance avec 5-3, mais où va le monde, putain? Needless to say, I am now fully on tilt. This is once again the very next shuffle, the 4th hand in a row I get involved in. It's Action City over here. Under the gun 1 limps, low jack calls, hijack calls. You already know the cutoff is calling. Button calls as well, before I look down at ace 9 offsuit in the small blind. Sitting on just over 12 big blinds, and with so much dead money in the pot, this is a premium spot for an all-in squeeze. But no, let's keep making atrocious plays and call. Big blind checks their option. We're going 7, yes, 7 ways to the flop of king 7 ace, giving me the toppest of the top pairs, which feels like the nuts right about now. Being first to act, I start things off with a check. Action checks around to my friend in the cutoff, who shockingly leads for 3000. The button folds, and you know what? I've just had about enough of this shit. I check raise all in for 7,200. If they want to call me with the worst ace, a king, a 7, queen jack, jack 10, Uno cards, I don't give a shit. One by one, everybody folds. Action is now back on the cutoff.
Yeah, about.
I only have an ace.
I have 2 pairs.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
I said you have out. There you go.
Does it out?
That's free second.
Well, damn. Looks like I got some run good left in me after all. I'll take it. On to the next one. Well, after this insane run of cards, things quiet down a bit. Another half hour goes by before this hand, where the cutoff, button, and small blind limp before I look down at ace 5 offsuit in the big blind. Probably a good spot for a squeeze and trying to take the pot down pre-flop, but I've seen that happen maybe once or twice in the 2 hours I've been sitting at this table, so I'm just going to take the free flop. We go 4 ways to a flop of king 7-7 2 clubs. Action checks around to the button, who does what they do best, bet huge, 3,700. Small blind folds, I fold, cutoff folds, and they take it down. About 10 minutes later, there's an open from under the gun to 2,200. Action folds to me in the hijack, and I look down at king jack offsuit. And although I haven't seen a whole lot of paint tonight, and I'm looking to get in the pot, I think this is a fold versus an undergun raise. I could end up in a whole lot of trouble if the flop comes jack high or king high, and I start facing a bunch of action. So I make a disciplined fold.
I was gonna say you must go through a lot of battery power.
Yeah, I'm 10%.
So you can hear me and my neighbor talking about my phone battery, and I have a little story to tell you before this hand. I know. You're probably like, come on man, let's move it along. Just show us the damn hand. To which I would reply, F you f***ing piece of shit, motherfucker. This is my vlog, I do whatever the f*** I want. And don't forget to like and subscribe. So yeah, the hand before, I was on the button and I realized I only had about 10% battery and my charger was in my car. I hate missing a hand, so I asked the dealer, hey, if I'm in the small blind but I'm not in my seat, do you muck my cards immediately or do you go around first? Which they said they would muck me immediately. So I said, meh, f the small blind anyway, and proceeded to run to my car. Thing is, I really hate missing a hand, so I ran as fast as I could, and thankfully, the previous hand took long enough for me to make my way back to the table just as the dealer was pitching cards. So I sit down to see the middle position player limp, the low jack raised to 3,800, miss 100% VPIP, casually flats from the cutoff, folds to me, and I look down at 2 black aces. I'm tempted to just flat because it's not like I've been very active at this table so far, and I'm worried a 3-bet will result in both my opponents folding, but I quickly come back to my senses. There's no way I'm flatting aces, so I do put out a 3-bet and make it 12,000 to go. The big blind, who is sitting on a medium stack, seems to really hate the spot, but they end up folding, and when action is back on the low jack, they 4-bet all in. I'm thinking the cutoff might decide to come along, but they fold, and I obviously snap call.
Okay, showtime. What do we got? Oh, hey. Okay. Here we go.
Shout out to Chris, hopefully I remembered your name right. Chris told me he watches the vlogs a while on the elliptical. Thanks for watching the videos, I appreciate it. I will gladly take your chips, even though I empathize with the spot you find yourself in.
Very skilled. Very skilled.
For the first time in this tournament, I actually have an above average stack. Hopefully, this is a sign of things turning around. Crazy to think I almost missed this hand. About 20 minutes later, I looked down at pocket eights from under the gun 1, and with my newfound wealth of chips, it's time to pick up the aggression, so I opened to 2,500. Middle position player then shoves for 5 big blinds. Action folds to the small blind, who makes the call, and when action comes back on me, I'm debating between calling and isolating the all-in player. A 4-bet here would represent somewhere between a quarter to a third of my stack. The player in the small blind has shown a willingness to be pretty sticky, and I don't really feel like bloating the pot out of position when the board is probably going to come with a bunch of overcards, so I end up taking the lower risk route and just call. We go 3 ways with 1 player all in, and action ends up checking all the way on a board of 10 king 6 7 6 with 3 hearts, and the all in player ended up taking it down with aces. The small blind showed jack 10 offsuit, which seems like a pretty loose call of a 3-bet shove from the small blind, even though it was only for 5 big blinds, but still. 10 minutes later, there's a couple of limps from the low jack and hijack before I look down at king queen offsuit on the button. I raise it up to 3200 and both limpers make the call. We go 3 ways to a flop of ace king jack 2 diamonds. Action checks to me and I debate between betting and checking. It's a good flop for my range, but not so great for my hand even though I pair up my king, so I decide to exercise some pot control and check back. The turn comes the ace of diamonds, and this time the low jack leads for 4000. The hijack folds. Low jack is the player who called with jack 10 in the previous hand. I think they can be doing this with a ton of hands I still beat, so I make the call. The river comes the 10 of hearts, giving me the straight, and now the low jack sizes up and bets 12,000. I can't think of many hands I lose to, with the exception of ace 10 or a flush, and given the profile of this player, I think they're very capable of going for a bluff on this very wet board. So after thinking for a while, I end up making the call.
That was straight too.
My opponent ended up rivering her straight with queen 7 of hearts, which they limp called my raise with pre-flop, led the turn with very little equity, and somehow landed on their feet on the river. Kind of annoying, we chopped the pot, but I would have gladly scooped all of it. 15 minutes later, there's a couple of limps from middle position and button players before the small blind shoves for less than 3 big blinds. I look down at queen 7 offsuit from the big blind, and given that with the big blind ante, I already have 2400 out, I decide to put in the extra 1000. Both the limpers make the call. We go 4 ways with 1 player all in to a flop of deuce queen 6. I lead out for 3200, hoping to go heads up against the all in player, but the button, same player from the 2 previous hands, makes the call. Heads up for the side pot to the turn, which comes the 8 of spades. I think my opponent is sometimes going to have a better queen, but a lot of times they're on a flush draw, so I decide to bet again for 9500, and they once again make the call. Not really loving the situation, and even less when the river comes the 8 of diamonds, completing the flush. At this point, I'm not getting value from much, so I check, and my opponent fires out a pretty sizable bet of just over 21,000.
Would be a pretty sick bluff considering you have to showdown.
The all-in player ends up showing ace 10 for ace high, and the button shows queen jack suited for the river flush. Looks like they had me all the way. I lose about a quarter of my stack on this hand. Let's hope the downtrend does not continue. The very next hand, there are limps from under the gun, hijack, and cutoff before I look down at pocket 8s in the small blind. In theory, I should probably go for a squeeze here, but almost every flop at this table has been going multi-way. Some players have shown a willingness to put in a lot of chips with pretty marginal holdings, so I think my best move is to simply call and try to set mine. Big blind checks their option. We go 5 ways to a flop of deuce 3 deuce 2 spades. Being first to act, I start things off with a check. The big blind decides to lead for 2500. Action folds to my current nemesis in the cutoff who calls, and once again, I don't really know what to do. I'm pretty confident I'm ahead of the cutoff, but in the limp pot, the big blind could definitely be holding a deuce here, especially when they're leading with 3 players still left to act. There's also a bunch of straight and flush draws possible, which I could definitely use some protection against. That being said, if I raise, one or both opponents could find a call, and then I could find myself in a world of pain if the turn and river come over cards or a spade. So ultimately, I decide to just call. We go 3 ways to the turn, which comes to 10 of clubs. I check. I'm surprised to see the big blind check, and this time it's the cutoff who takes the lead for 7,000. In a heads up scenario against this player, I'm snap calling, but I'm not really sure what the big blind is doing. I would hate calling only for the big blind to check raise for a massive amount. I'm not really sure what to do, but I'm a little bit tilted as I'm back to being card dead and losing a bunch of pots in a row. I'm definitely not making optimal decisions at this point. I make the call. The big blind thinks for a bit before also calling. I have no idea where I'm at in this hand as we go to the river, which comes the king of spades, completing the flush. I check. The big blind checks. I literally have no clue what they have at this point. The cutoff bets again for just under 14,000, and we both fold. An orbit later, there's a limp from under the gun, and I look down at ace king suited in middle position. I raise to 4,200, and sadly, everybody folds. 15 minutes later, action folds to me on the button and I pick up king 7 offsuit. I make a mandatory open to 4,000, small blind folds, and the big blind goes into the tank. I swear to God, if I get 3-bet here, I'm going to lose my mind. After 20 seconds, they end up deciding on a fold, and I win back some much needed chips. A whole half hour later, folds to me in the low jack, and I look down at king 9 suited. I open to 5,000, the cutoff calls before the button 3-bets all in for 21,000, and the small blind 4-bet jams for 42,500. God damn it! I opened the first semi-decent looking hand I pick up in half an hour, and I'm facing a 3-bet and a 4-bet shove. Both myself and the cutoff fold. The button, who is at risk, shows pocket aces, and the small blind shows pocket tens. The board comes 6-9-4 2 clubs. The turn is the 8 of clubs, of course, and the river is the 7 of spades. The small blind makes runner straight to crack the button's aces. Ouch. About 10 minutes later, there's an open from under the gun to 5,000, which under the gun 1 calls. Folds to me in the big blind, and I look down at jack 10 suited. I am back to being super tilted by now, and sitting on 13 bigs, this is looking like a perfect opportunity to 3-bet shove and maybe pick up the pot. On the other hand, I'm closing the action, and with 13 bigs, I think I can afford to wait for a better spot to shove, so I end up making the call, fully prepared to commit my stack on any favorable flop. But it comes queen, deuce, 4 with 1 club, checks around. Can I pick up a pair? A king? A 9? A club? Nope. Turn is another deuce. I check to under the gun, who bets 8,000. Under the 1 calls, and I fold. 10 minutes later, there's an open to 7,000 from under the gun. The low jack calls. I pick up king jack, which would normally seem like a decent hand, but with very little fold equity and facing an under the gun raise. I fold. 10 minutes later, action folds to the small blind, and they fold. And for the first time in 3 hours, I finally take down a pot. Let's go! Yeah! Another 10 minutes later, I'm down to 3 big blinds. Action folds to the cutoff, who opens for 10,000. Quick note on the cutoff, it's a player named David, who sat down at our table about half an hour ago, and he is on an absolute sun run. He must have busted 3 players already. He's getting dealt monsters, hitting boards, getting paid. He just won with ace king versus queens for a massive amount of chips. He must be chip leader of the tournament right now. So when action folds to me and I look down at ace 10 offsuit in the small blind, I'm not loving it, but I don't really have any option but to shove.
Sorry, the worst decision I made all tournament against David, but alright, we're heads up, right? We're good?
Only he has to call still.
Oh, alright. Oh! Shit, he's got hearts. He's free rolling.
And 1 in the window.
Go! Nice hand, David.
And this concludes this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and you know what? Even if you didn't, you probably still enjoyed it more than I enjoyed playing this tournament. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you run better than this at the tables, and I'll catch you in the next one.